Thank you, Rabbi Klein. This is actually the very first time in my life I have been introduced by another Klein. Which I hadn't thought of before now, but thank you. And at Keshet, when we work with rabbis and day school teachers and Hebrew school teachers and youth movement leaders, we always say, when a kid comes out to you, you tell them Mazal Tov, or an adult. So Rabbi Klein, Mazal Tov on coming out as a flight attendant. And to all of you, Shabbat Shalom and Pride Sameach. So as Rabbi Klein implied, this is my last Pride talk this month, which means it is my last Pride talk and my last talk of my 24 years as CEO of Keshet. And it is particularly meaningful for me that CBST is a part of my closing chapter at Keshet, because a key part of my queer Jewish journey began right here at CBST. Let me tell you how. It was late fall of my senior year of college. My then girlfriend and I took Metro North from New Haven to New York to come to Kabbalat Shabbat services at CBST. And in true lesbian style, she and I have remained friends all these 30 plus years since then, and she is here with us tonight. So back to my senior year of college. I had come out a few months earlier and learned when I did that no one before me who was a leader in our college's Hillel had ever come out. I was the first. And I started planning joint programs between what we then called the LGB co-op on campus and Hillel. It was all very new, thrilling, and a little bit scary. So when I learned about CBST, I pretty much immediately asked my girlfriend if she would come to New York with me to services. And off we went. Unlike me, she hadn't grown up Jewishly affiliated. She hadn't grown up going to synagogue. And also, unlike me, she did grow up knowing queer people, whereas I didn't know that I knew any. Within minutes of arriving to services at CBST, I was just amazed. And I turned to her and I whispered, "I can't believe all these people are gay." And she looked right back at me and whispered, "I can't believe all these people are Jewish." So for us both, being at CBST filled us with wonder, albeit for very different reasons. I remember listening to Rabbi Sharon Kleinbaum and feeling so moved and inspired by her words. I had no idea then that within less than a decade, I would go on also to work for LGBTQ equality in Jewish life and the broader world. I had no idea then that Sharon would become my mentor and a dear friend. So you understand why it's meaningful for me to be here tonight. So I opened my remarks a couple of minutes ago saying Pride Sameach. But I know, of course, that this year, this Pride, our simcha, our joy, is tempered. In just the last few weeks, we learned of the devastating Skarmedi decision. We saw the beginning and hopefully the end of the war between Israel and Iran. And not long before that, we saw the horrific attack in Boulder and the tragic shootings at the Jewish Museum, all against a backdrop of rising anti-Semitism. So this is not a pride of simple simcha. This is not an easy pride. With the Israel-Hamas war well into year 2, with hostages in Gaza at day 630, and tens of thousands of Palestinians killed, while those who remain alive facing dispossession and starvation, this is not an easy pride. And here in the States, We see relentless, vicious attacks on our LGBTQ community, particularly on trans youth. We see immigrants disappeared from the streets, from their places of work, from courthouses, and so very much more that makes this not an easy pride. But I believe it is a necessary pride. It is necessary for all of us who believe in LGBTQ equality and justice. And perhaps for Jews this year, pride may be a gift. For pride is a time to remember that we are resilient. Pride is a time to remember that even amidst sorrow and despair, we know how to find our joy. We know how to find hope. And pride is a time to remember and to embrace the power of our authentic selves. So Pride Sameach with all of that. I've been doing this work of creating spaces for LGBTQ Jews to be our full authentic selves for the past 24 years. And throughout those years, perhaps the most common question I've received is, how is it that you became a professional queer Jew? And people are often surprised when I share with them that my third grade Orthodox rabbi plays a key role in my answer to that question. I had transferred from public school to an Orthodox day school at the start of third grade, so I'd never seen a Chumash, a book of Torah, before. On my first day of school, my rabbi, Rabbi Yechiel Dubovik, whenever I tell this story, I always say his name because I haven't been able to find him. Does anyone know Rabbi Yechiel Dubovik? All right, failed again. All right, so Rabbi Dubovik put a Chumash on my desk, and he flipped it open, and he pointed at the center of the page. And he said, here is the main story. And then he pointed at the left-hand column, and he said, and here is what one person has to say about that story. And then he pointed at the bottom of the page, and he said, and here's what another person has to say about that story. And sometimes they disagree with one another. And sometimes I disagree with them. And you know what? Sometimes you may disagree with them. And you know what? And then he bent down so he could look me right in the eye, and he said, you know what? Sometimes you may disagree with me, but you remember, I always want to know what you think. So there I was, an 8-year-old girl growing up in a secular Israeli household, and I was handed the keys to Jewish tradition. I was told, this is yours. You are a part of it, and it is a part of you, and you are inextricably linked forever. You are a part of the collective Jewish story. No question. Now, I'm not saying that my Orthodox Jewish day school education wholly informed why I became a professional queer Jew, but it for sure played a role in shaping my identity as a Jew and my sense of self as a leader. And so I had the chutzpah at age 28 to show up at the Boston Jewish Federation, CJP, and ask for a meeting with the president. And I still have no idea why they gave me one, but they did. And I went to meet with him and suggested to him in very strong words, I hope nicely, but I don't recall, suggest to him strongly that he needed to find the funds to provide seed money so that I could start running Keshet out of a room in my triple-decker Boston apartment. So it's 24 years later, and thankfully, so much has changed, including that Keshet is no longer in that apartment, and nor am I. We now have 6 offices around the country, and I have a house. So this Erev Shabbat, what I'd like to do is share a few stories with you about what that arc of change has looked like nationwide, and what strength and hope we can draw for all that we face today. When I first started building Keshet in the early 2000s, people regularly seemed bewildered when I told them what I did for work. They would ask me things like, so is that a Jewish issue? Or Gay and lesbian Jews. Are there many of you? These days, these are the kinds of responses I get, and not just these days, for, I'd say, the last 15 plus years. I get, could you work with my synagogue? We really need your help. Or, my granddaughter is trans. How can I connect her with Keshet? Or, this one is my favorite. My 25-year-old son is gay and so smart. Do you have a job for him? And indeed, we are connected with many LGBTQ Jewish young people. At Keshet LGBTQ Jewish Teen and Ally Shabbatonim, as Rabbi Klein mentioned before, queer Jewish teens come together and they discover that they can exhale. Many of these young people tell us that the Keshet Shabbaton is the only place, still in 2025, the only place where they can be fully themselves as LGBTQ Jews. Over and over at these retreats, kids from secular to Orthodox, kids from New York City and small towns in Texas, from Orthodox shuls and the most liberal shuls and no shuls at all, they will just stop in their tracks and declare with a tone of wonder, it just feels so amazing to be somewhere where I can be fully myself. They experience a lot of joy. Earlier this year, one trans teen dubbed the particular unique joy at a Keshet Shabbaton queer Jewish euphoria. They have queer prom, they dress up and look fabulous, they dance and they laugh, they hug. I'm so grateful that queer Jewish teens feel this kind of joy at Shabbatonim, especially now and in the past couple of years. In the aftermath of October 7th, we've heard young people talk about being excluded from queer spaces because of their Jewish identities and or their connections with Israel. And we've also heard queer Jewish young people talk about being excluded from Jewish spaces because of their critical views of Israel. As a queer teen from Iowa told us, I really enjoyed being able to exist as both Jewish and queer in peace at the Shabbaton. I feel like nowadays Jewish spaces are even more unaccepting of queerness, and queer spaces are increasingly unaccepting of Jewishness. So you never get a rest because you're on the lookout for homophobia or transphobia or anti-Semitism. But at the Keshet Shabbaton, I can rest. And of course, that sense of isolation and vulnerability has increased exponentially since the inauguration, and I know even more so since the Skermeti decision. We're hearing from kids, and it's these exact words pretty much over and over. We're hearing, I fear for my life. Even though I have support, I'm still scared. I feel guilty because my being trans puts my family in danger. We are disposable to America. These words are painful. But thankfully, they're not the only words teens are sharing with us. What we hear even more are words about the difference that queer Jewish community can make, how these moments of connection make it so unmistakably clear to them that they and all of us are going to get through. And that tells me that our work at Keshet and here at CBST, that our work is an antidote to that isolation. From our earliest days at Keshet, we have met Jewish organizations wherever they are and pushed them, sometimes gently, sometimes a little less than gently, to stretch further than they ever imagined possible and become communities where queer Jews can thrive. We've always urged Jewish leaders to speak out for LGBTQ equality, and since January, we've become even more insistent in telling Jewish leaders to make it clear to their students, their congregants, to all their community members, No matter what you may hear from the Oval Office or from the Supreme Court, no matter what you may hear from your state house, know that here in our Jewish community, you are loved. Know that here in our Jewish community, we will do whatever we can to keep you safe. Know that here in our Jewish community, we will celebrate you, Rabbi Jason Klein, and tell you Mazal Tov when you come out. And know that here in our Jewish community, we will never, ever stop fighting for you. Messages matter. Symbols matter. I've been thinking back often lately to a couple of days after the 2016 election. That day, I received an email from Erin Schreiber, a Hillel director at a college outside of St. Louis. And she wrote to me that very early the morning after the election, her phone buzzed and awakened her, and she saw that she had a text from a trans student who was really in crisis. And so immediately, without really thinking it through, she said, "I'll meet you at the Hillel office in 15 minutes. And she jumped out of bed and threw a sweatshirt on and was in her car and on her way within a couple of minutes. And then a couple of minutes later, it suddenly hit her how distraught she was and how she was in absolutely no state to support anyone. And she thought, oh my God, what have I done? What am I going to say to this student? That was so irresponsible of me. I don't know what is going to happen now. But of course, she continued to the Hill office. She walked in, opened her office door, and nearly stepped on an envelope that had been tucked under her door. She picked up the envelope and saw that it was an envelope from Keshet, inside of which were the LGBTQ Jewish safe zone stickers she had ordered the previous week. And so when her student walked in, she held up the sticker and she said, "Look, there is hope in the world. We have a whole community that is standing with us, and they will help us get through. We'll get through." So over the past 9 years, and admittedly increasingly over the last however many interminable months it has been since January, I have thought of that student. And I don't know his name. I don't know that I ever will. I don't know where he is in the world, but I've thought of him and I've imagined him remembering that morning when he felt so much despair and thinking to himself, on that day when I didn't know where to turn, I decided to turn to my Jewish community for support, and I found it. We must continue to push for change so that every teacher, every rabbi, every Hillel professional knows, like Erin, how to build a community where queer Jews know that we belong. And these are conversations we also must have, even when it's scary, even when it's really hard, outside the boundaries of our Jewish community. At Keshet, we've been talking directly with our partner LGBTQ organizations to ensure that queer Jews continue to have a place in our broader LGBTQ community and to ensure that we continue to be in solidarity. We've reached out to our secular LGBTQ partners when they've used language around Israel and Gaza that feels problematic and hurtful to us. We've reached out to ask for support and to tell them we need to see your solidarity in responding to anti-Semitism. Let me tell you a story. Last year, a little bit earlier than now, as we entered Pride season, we started getting a lot of calls to all of our offices around the country from queer Jews asking us, is it safe for me to march in Pride? We started hearing that people were feeling anxious about showing up visibly as Jews at Pride. We had hard conversations as a staff about whether we should skip Pride, and some staff thought we should. They said, our first responsibility is to keep our people safe, and we cannot guarantee that we can keep our people safe this year. Of course, we never can, but somehow it felt scarier in a deeper, more acute way for the first time to be afraid of our own LGBTQ community than the usual fear of being harassed or worse by homophobes or transphobes. But in the end, we decided we are not going to hide, and so we reached out to the pride organizers in the 17 cities and towns where Keshet was having a pride presence. And we took a lot of deep breaths, and we said, queer Jews are feeling scared. Most were very surprised to hear this, some weren't. But they all, to a person, were so grateful that we reached out, were receptive to what we shared with them, and promised to implement our recommendations. I want to tell you about one Pride interaction that particularly stands out for me. This was at Miami Pride. When our contingent, the Keshet contingent, got to the parade, they discovered that the contingent right in front of us was the contingent from Equality Florida, which is the statewide LGBTQ rights organization in Florida that has been our key coalition partner in fighting anti-LGBTQ bills in Florida. So we stood around talking for a while, and then one of their staff members approached our lead Florida staff member and said to him, all of us at Equality Florida, we've been talking. We know that things have been rough for the Jewish community, and people might be feeling vulnerable. So we want you to know that if things heat up today, at any moment, know that you can merge into our contingent, and we will surround you. That is a depth of connection and solidarity that comes from working side by side, from learning to see each other's humanity if we didn't already, and establishing real relationships across lines of difference. I'm going to share one more Pride story since this is my last talk. Okay, so this Pride is this is a more recent one from World Pride just a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C. So it was just a couple of weeks ago, which means it was just a couple of weeks after the murders of Yaron and Sarah outside the Capitol Jewish Museum. Everyone in the Jewish contingent was visibly on edge and feeling apprehensive. And I am thrilled and a bit incredulous to share with you that throughout the entire very long parade route, our very visibly Jewish contingent, which included a couple of people holding large Israeli flags, received not a single boo, not a single jeer, not a single unpleasant remark of any kind, only cheers. And there was one particularly remarkable moment. At various junctures throughout the parade, an announcer would call out the names of the contingents as they were passing. So generally, we'd know we were next when we would hear him say, "Happy Pride, LGBTQ Quakers," and then we'd know next would be, "Happy Pride, LGBTQ Jews." And we'd feel a little bit vulnerable, but it would happen. We'd keep walking, no issue, continue cheers. Except one time, I assume because the announcer noticed the Israeli flags, and it was World Pride after all, she said, "Happy Pride, LGBTQ friends from Israel." And for a second, it was as if time stood still and we all froze. And then, cheers. It was an extraordinary moment to see that whether we were queer American Jews or queers from Israel, we were being cheered as queer members of our global community deserving of embrace and celebration. When I shared this story with Rabbi Klein earlier this week, he commented that the God of surprises must have decided to make an appearance. In these daunting times, I turn to such moments again and again for strength and inspiration, these moments of blessing from the God of surprises. I also look back to earlier days, and I'm even more amazed at how far we have come. Last May marked the 20th anniversary of marriage equality in Massachusetts, where I live. 20 years of being able to marry the person you love, no matter their gender. Now, when marriage equality became the law in Massachusetts in 2004, as you may recall, our opponents immediately struck back and tried to rescind this newly won right. Keshet led the Jewish community's effort to preserve marriage equality for good. I will never forget standing in front of the Massachusetts State House for hours with other queer Jews and allies holding a large banner that said, "The Massachusetts Jewish community supports equal marriage." And at least 4 or 5 times an hour, someone would come charging up to us, livid like if I first saw them where the Shabbat candles are, I could see the anger on their face. And they would come charging up to us and shout really close in our faces, "How dare you stand here with this sign? You know this isn't what Jews believe." And the thing is, they were right. In 2004, it was not what most Jews believed. It wasn't what most people in Massachusetts believed. It certainly wasn't what most people in this country believed. But our organizing, together with thousands and thousands and thousands of others, made a difference in the Jewish community, in Massachusetts, ultimately the nation, as we celebrated 10 years of Obergefell yesterday, and of course, we won. At the 20th anniversary celebration of marriage equality in Boston last year, we heard from Mary Bonato, the lead attorney who won the case. She said to us, "We took what was unimaginable and we turned it into a joyous reality," which of course is beautifully true. But what I think is even more extraordinary is that we took what was unimaginable and we turned it into an ordinary reality. How many of you have kids in your lives who cannot imagine a world without marriage equality? All right, I know you're out there even though you're not raising your hands. Or a world without openly trans people in their lives, or a world without an LGBTQ affirming rabbi. For them, these are simply ordinary realities. It's unimaginable that life was ever any other way. I will be stepping down as CEO of Keshet on July 31st. And as I reflect on my life after that, when I will no longer be a professional queer Jew, I ask myself, what vision of justice today feels beyond my collective imagination, feels beyond our collective imagination, yet in 20 years might just become the ordinary reality of our world? Ask yourself, what feels unattainable? What feels impossible to imagine changing today? Yet in another generation, we won't be able to imagine that it was ever any different. I hope you will join me in keep seizing the unimaginable and transforming it into an ordinary reality. Just think how glorious that will be. Shabbat Shalom and Pride Sameach.
Some fun CVST things for you to go back to your first time in the community. And thank you. This is such an honor for us tonight.